glorious gamers out there. Welcome to the PlayerStoo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayerStoo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really helps us out. And there's a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. I know I say this twice a week, every week, but it really does not become less important on a weekly basis. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely does mean a lot. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going very well. Good to see you as ever, Mark. How are you getting on?
Not bad at all. It has been gloriously sunny in Glasgow for a change.
Yeah.
And I have managed to get out of the house a little bit, which is good. That's better than usual.
It is better than usual, yeah. And lockdown sounds like it's finally easing a bit here in Glasgow, which is fantastic. So we might get out a bit more and actually see some people now and again, which would be great.
Yeah, Glasgow, worst place in the country for a while there, but we're looking up. We're looking better. We've got more vaccines coming in. It's all good. Anyway, Liz, video games. What have you been playing this week?
This week, Mark, just a little bit of Returnal, actually, following on from you playing it before. Yeah, I haven't had a lot of time for it, I'll admit, because I'm still sort of trying to recover my energy and my perspective on what life is after moving a couple of weeks ago. It's all still a little bit strange, but I have managed to squeeze a few hours in and a few runs into Returnal, which I was really enjoying from the little bit I've played. I'm talking maybe 4 or 5 hours kind of maximum at the moment. So still in Biome 1, had a decent run at the first boss. But overall, yeah, I would say that the gameplay is just buttery smooth. It is unreal how good it feels to play. And I think, as you were saying, how good the sound is and how good the visuals are. Like, as a full package from not a top team necessarily, or not up till now at least, it's just a really slick product altogether. I think it's a world that I'm really enjoying being in. I love the way that the game starts, where you're not really primed with anything story-wise or gameplay-wise. It just sort of chucks you out into this world and says, go off.
That'll continue, Liz. That'll continue.
Yeah, a little bit. And, as I've gone through the first biome, I've found some odd occurrences. I think you mentioned the house that pops up. I won't say any more than that for anyone who's still to play the game, but I've had a first little look around there. Some really great enemy design, some fantastic bits of level design. Still very much getting to grips with it all and kind of finding out what the game is about and kind of what my strategy should be. But yeah, as a first introduction to it, with all the caveats and the fears that I was going into it with around how annoying the roguelike structure would be and having to restart every time I die, which, again, for anyone who's new as a listener to us, like, time is a big component of our gaming experience. How much time can we invest in something as people with normal jobs and lives? That was my big concern going in, but from playing it for a few hours and dying a couple of times and having to restart, I've not been overly frustrated. I totally know that might come, but so far so good.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think particularly early on, when you die, you die. Do you know what I mean? It's part of the game. It's part of what the learning process for the game is. To be honest with you, the game outright kills you, I think, at a few points, I would be very, very surprised if people got much beyond the first boss on, like, their first couple of runs anyway. Do you know what I mean? I think most people would probably have, like, 1 or 2 runs at the final boss anyway of the first biome. But then after that is when you start having to go through Biome 1, then Biome 2, then Biome 3. Do you know what I mean? And you have to do all of that in a single run. Get lucky enough that you get the components you need to do that in the first place, and then get good enough components by the end up to even take on the third boss. It can be quite time consuming to do that. I know specifically you're mentioning time, and my time is precious for gaming, but I dare say that yours might even be more so. So I sort of still worry about if you're going to have the time, like, even convince yourself that you have the time to be able to do it. I really hope that you do, quite genuinely, because it is fantastic. And as you said, the gameplay is really great. It's buttery smooth. the visuals on screen at any moment when you're being attacked is like something else.
Yeah.
It is absolutely incredible, and particularly when you come up to some of the later bosses, the stuff on screen is just absolutely wild. It is the time thing. I worried about it by myself, and I very nearly put my controller down and was just saying enough's enough, do you know what I mean? And in fact, if I didn't complete it on the day that I did, that would have been me done. So fortunately I did do that, but yeah, I think that could be a problem for a lot of people, you know?
Yeah, it's really just, as you say, psychologically about finding the time to invest in it and to just keep going and push through that. But at the same time, I am telling myself, if I get a good few hours of gameplay out of it and enjoy those, and if I don't feel like pushing on and trying to make that ending, potentially going through more and more runs, then I think I'll be quite happy putting it down. But I'm just really glad to have played it, and you know, I definitely will be giving it more hours than I've given it thus far, you know.
Nice one, man.
What about you? What have you been playing?
Well, Lewis, I have finally got round to playing Cyberpunk 2077, which I actually bought a fair while ago, but has had one of the most infamously bad launches in video game history. So I think that I might be about to say something quite controversial here, Lewis, but it's actually pretty good. It genuinely is. Now, full disclosure, everything that I am about to say has to be taken with this knowledge going forward. I am playing this on a PlayStation 5. It has had multiple patches since launch. So the game that I am playing in my gameplay experience, particularly on a PlayStation 5 versus last-gen consoles, will probably be quite different, particularly if you were playing it on last-gen consoles at launch. However, having said that, the game is by no means glitch-free. Even on the loading screens, Lewis, the images behind them sometimes just don't load right, so you'll see like smoke effects, but the image itself will just be black. It's absolutely bizarre. When I first started up the game, actually, the first thing that it says when you get to the title screen, it's like Cyberpunk 2077, and it says press options to start. And I pressed options and nothing happened. And then I pressed it again and nothing happened. And then I pressed it quite a lot and nothing happened. And I was like, it can't surely have broke immediately on the title screen. I was actually looking at my controller and I was like, I am absolutely pressing the right button here. And then it started playing. It just started playing. There was just an insane lag between the time that I first pressed the options button to begin the game until the game actually started. Also, when I was first in the game, it just wouldn't let me change my camera view from inside the car, which meant that I was driving in first person all the time. The cars within the game that I've been in anyway is near impossible. Like, you have to be in third person outside of the car to be driving worth a damn. So I had to restart the game to make that happen because it just wasn't allowing me to do that. I've come across certain items as well that for whatever reason it just will not allow me to pick up. Don't know why. Occasionally as well, like, dead enemies will reanimate and then just fall immediately back down. I don't know why. Like, I don't know if it's because they are trying to like deload them from the game and then I'm turning back around and seeing them again and then they're trying to load them in very quickly, but the game is not really capable of doing that, it doesn't seem, because it just seems as if they come in and like T-pose, then ragdoll flop down to the floor again, and it's just like, that's not great, is it? Let's be honest. But in terms of things like textures and people looking like potato people and whatever that you were getting from early footage of the game, like, I've not had any of that, to be fair, like, at all. And although those things that I mentioned were annoying, like the loading screen thing happens basically every single time that I play the game, but it doesn't matter, it's a loading screen, I don't really care. The camera thing happened once when I was first playing the game, but has not happened again since. The enemies reanimating occasionally does happen sometimes, but like, it takes you out of the game for like all of a second. But overall, it's been basically fine, honestly. What I will say about the game is that the stealth elements of it, they don't really work at all, to be honest. Basically, everything devolves into a massive gunfight at some point, regardless, it feels like. And because of that, a lot of the hacking elements of the game that were actually quite interesting and are quite interesting and are incredibly complex, it sort of fall a bit flat because it's just like, all right, we're going to get into a big gunfight anyway, so it's like, what's the point? But I have to say, the world in and of itself is actually pretty impressive. It's incredibly vertical in a way that I don't think that I've seen a game do before, and I know that that was a comment that was said originally when the game came out. But at the same time, it's not like earth-shattering, game-changing world or anything like that. To be honest with you, I really don't understand what the problem is in a lot of situations. Like, I'm not seeing anything in this game that I'm like, oh, well, that's obviously what's causing all these problems. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't really get why it was such a problem. Is it densely packed? Like, yes, it is. But GTA 5 came out in the PS3.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's unfathomable to me that this world wasn't able to be rendered and built technically within the constraints of like a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox One, you know? There's no reason for that in my head. It's just that they've not given it enough time, or they've not given it enough care. Genuinely, that's what it feels like. I don't really know enough about game design to say that 100%, but if they gave this game another year, would it have been fine? Maybe. I will say that this game is definitely not the revolutionary RPG that we all thought that it might be. And I mean that even in concept, and in actual fact, like, a lot of the RPG elements feel unimportant. There are so many of them. There are so many things that you can upgrade about yourself. But it sort of means that none of them feel very important. You feel as if you're changing like minor things about yourself, and it's not drastically changing the way that you play the game in any capacity, really, at all. Or certainly not so far as I've been playing. So that is a little bit disappointing, but in and of itself, like, the story that it's telling, the actual gameplay is pretty good. It's a pretty good game, but it's not groundbreaking. It's not groundbreaking at all, to be honest.
Well, there you go. I mean, without having played it, it's hard to kind of comment too much because there's so much going on with what you've just said about Cyberpunk. I mean, still sounds to me like maybe not game-breaking bugs or really massive issues, but for a full-price product, you don't want any of that really to be happening. So
No, you don't, mate. You definitely don't, but I may be laying it on a wee bit thick. Honestly, I've not had anything in the game that I'm thinking, like, Jesus, that is awful. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've not had anything like that at all. Even, like, these bodies reanimating in a play session, maybe that will happen, like, twice, maybe. It's not happening a lot of what is quite a high body count, to be honest, as you play through the game. Do you know what I mean? It's not a huge deal, or it's not for me anyway. It's not a huge deal. It's not really why I'm there. But whereas the story and the characters, which I think is by far and away the most interesting thing about the game, is actually really good, and I'm interested in it and I'm invested in it.
Totally, yeah.
That's great. Like, that part of it's great, but is it this revolutionary game that it was supposed to be, or that we were told that it was supposed to be, more to the point? It isn't. It just isn't. It's not.
That's a shame, but good that you're enjoying it so far anyway, from what you have played.
Definitely. In its current state, on PlayStation 5, I can say that it's worth playing. On last-gen consoles, I'm not sure.
Yeah, don't. Just don't.
Anyway, Lewis, on that note, time for the news. Alright, Lewis, news item number 1. And speaking of Cyberpunk, it has been in the news again this week. Firstly, because they now have a new director called Gabriel Amatangelo, and I hope I'm not butchering that man's second name, who has previously worked on expansions for Dragon Age Inquisition and Star Wars The Old Republic. This after the previous director had stepped down and then subsequently left the company after the launch of Cyberpunk 2077. The new director will presumably be responsible for the apparently still upcoming free DLC for the game. Also this week, in a call to investors, CDPR have had to admit that they have missed their predicted profit margins by what is quite a huge amount, to be honest with you. Analysts had predicted profits of around 80 million zloty, but they have only managed 32.5 million zloty, which, although is still a lot, is not even half of what it was predicted that they would be getting. They also released another roadmap, which was as embarrassingly vague as the one that they released at the beginning of the year, if anyone remembers that. Basically, it says, starting from now into 2022, we should expect multiple patches and updates with no dates attached to it whatsoever, free DLC with no dates attached to it whatsoever, and new gen editions as well of the games, e.g. the PS5 and the Series X versions of the game in the second half of the year, but again, with no dates attached to them. As well as that, it has now been 6 months since the game was removed from PlayStation stores. CEO Adam Kavinsky told investors that there was no new information on the game's return to the store, although apparently there are ongoing discussions. The Forbes article that I am referencing suggests that the game may actually never get back onto the PlayStation 4 store, and that they will just wait for the PlayStation 5 version. So, Lewis, a lot of information there. Where would you like to start?
Well, I guess let's start with what seems like the more positive part of it, being the new director. He's got some credentials there. He's got some track record of improving the games that he's worked on post-release, so that's encouraging. I guess it can't really get much worse than it's been for Cyberpunk up to this point.
Absolutely not.
So bringing someone in who knows post-game content, who knows DLC, who knows update patches, who knows how to add some value to a game that has already released, that is a smart move as far as I can tell. On all the other fronts though, it's still not good, is it? I mean, it's not a surprise in the least, obviously, that it is not making the money that it was expected to make. How could it? It just simply could not be doing that. If it was making the money they had predicted, people would be buying a broken game repeatedly all the time. So
yeah, and it being removed from the PlayStation Store, I was never going to achieve the numbers that it was predicted to achieve. Wasn't possible, you know.
Yeah, exactly that. And so I don't want to put the boot in too heavily. I mean, there's no point in criticising them for not making money that basically has been taken off the table. But the point about the re-entry to the PlayStation Store, I still think is really fascinating. How is it that we are 6 months on and it is not on the biggest console digital store? It is crazy that is still happening. I mean, whether that's because the relationship with Sony broke down so badly around the whole just ask the platforms for refunds thing when the game first launched. I mean, that was seemingly pretty disastrous and led Sony to just say, we're taking this off the store. But I think the real question about whether it comes back as just a PS5 version or not, I mean, that's maybe a way to handle all this. You just move on, you cut your losses with the old gen.
Well, physical releases of the old gen still exist. I've got one. I'm looking at one right now.
Yeah, it's possible to play it on old gen, and it's possible to play it on PS5 at the moment, as you're doing.
But it still needs the support as well. Do you know what I mean? Exactly. It still needs all these patches and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks bad for the game. I mean, it must also be encouraging, or rather discouraging, people on all sorts of other platforms from picking it up. The sales numbers that they're getting suggest that just the general situation around it, which is most tellingly pointed to by the lack of it being on the PlayStation Store, that all must be having a detrimental effect. I think there'll still be a bit of outrage if a PS5 version comes and they just sort of say there will be no PS4 version or digitally available. We're not going to update that version. Basically, that time is dead. I think there'll be some anger there because there's still tens of millions of people who have a PS4 and who want to play it and who don't have a PS5 and maybe won't get a PS5 anytime soon. So it's all still not great, but maybe there's some signs here that they at least... I mean, I wondered if they would have just given up on it by now, so the fact that they're still claiming to have a roadmap at least is a good sign, maybe? What do you think?
Well, the CEO, Adam Kavinsky, has actually said that they can't not support it, basically. Yeah. Like, they will be supporting it going forward. It seems that we're still getting free DLC. They're still committed to that. I know that they've walked back the multiplayer aspect of this quite a while ago now, to be honest. So I know that they've walked back certain things, but I think what they'll probably do is that they'll get the game in a working state, they'll release some free DLC, then they'll wash the hands of it and make The Witcher 4, is what they'll do.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. And maybe that's for the best, all right.
To be honest with you, it might be. Alright, let's news item number 2. PlayStation have also had an investors call this week, and that has thrown quite a lot of interesting pieces of information around. Firstly, it seems that they have accidentally revealed that Uncharted 4 will be the next PlayStation game coming to PC, and I think, to be honest with you, that's a pretty logical fit. They also seem to have accidentally confirmed that the new God of War will be called Ragnarok. PlayStation, I think, have now began walking that back, saying that the game isn't officially called Ragnarok, which it isn't, but I think that we all know that it sort of is. This was revealed, quote unquote, because they used a fan-made logo that stated God of War Ragnarok in their official presentation, which has obviously had many eyes looking at it, and no one identified that was a problem. So I definitely think that this game's called God of War Ragnarok. I don't really know why they're being secretive about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think by trying to hide it, they're making it more apparent, really.
See, be honest with you, if it's not called God of War Ragnarok now, what's it going to be called? God of War Ragnarok is a great name for this game.
And it's what everyone is calling it, so...
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, bizarre. It has also been revealed that 41% of PlayStation 4/PlayStation 5 owners are women, which is very, very fucking cool indeed. Yeah. And I never in a million years thought the number would be that high, to be completely honest. I know that way more women are gaming these days than have ever gamed before, which is fucking awesome. I still didn't think that the ownership numbers would be that high for PlayStation, to be honest. That is insane. If you told me that it was 25%, I would have been like, fuck me, that's high.
Yeah.
But 41, I mean, Jesus, that's amazing. Like, genuinely, that is incredibly good news.
Yeah.
I hope that that's indicative of, like, across the industry as well. Like, I hope if you looked at Xbox and PC and Switch, well, Switch might be even higher, to be honest with you. Like, Nintendo games have always sort of resonated more with women, thinking specifically of Animal Crossing, which seems to be the most popular thing on the internet for a while. Although not just with women, I have to say. Yeah, incredible. Like, I hope that that is, like, indicative of things across the industry, and I think that when you start to put out games like The Last of Us and Horizon and whatever that have female leads and whatever that are just fucking awesome games that aren't games for girls in any capacity, they're just awesome games that happen to have a female lead, then this is the sort of response that you get, and I hope that that is genuinely an approach taken by more and more people, and we do see that grow, because really this should be 50-50, so it's not as high as it should be. You know?
Yeah, but like you say, I mean, incredible numbers to see. And
I'm not trying to distract.
No, not at all. And the stats that I think they showed included the numbers of women who had owned the PS1, what that percentage was, and the jump.
It was 18%. It was 18% in the PS1 to 41 now. That's fucking great.
And
man.
we do
That's
hear
awesome.
a lot that there's parity between men and women when you take in all kind of aspects of gaming, and so particularly mobile skews that quite heavily. But when you look at this and you go, well, this is the biggest console platform, to see numbers like this, it's really, really good. I think you're totally right. It's testament to Sony being a lot braver than some other companies, not just about featuring female leads, by the way, but also making their male leads less one-dimensional and making their narratives less one-dimensional, and just making it a richer storytelling environment that people want to spend time in and spend their money on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think play some of the old God of Wars versus God of War 2018 and you can see a very clear line in the sand there, I think, which is fucking great. Like, absolutely fantastic. But Lewis, the very, very interesting thing to me anyway, as a person who likes numbers and is a weird nerd about stuff like this, despite confirming they were selling the PlayStation 5 at a loss, the PlayStation 5 will break even this month. We know that PlayStation has had the best launch of any console in history. I think it's 7.8 million have sold through the first financial year, which was from launch until March. And we also know that there's still a huge disparity in supply and demand, and that the supply absolutely cannot meet the demand even still, and Sony literally cannot make these things fast enough. But even still, to be profitable on a console that you were selling for a loss at this point, you know, is very impressive, I think, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, I thought it would be quite a long time before we started to see these numbers change, given there just aren't the units to sell. I can't quite get my head around how they are starting to turn a profit on it, given
somehow this is the most successful launch in PlayStation history, and yet also the worst launch in PlayStation history. I don't know how those two things are happening simultaneously.
Yeah, it's like the narrative is still very much that no one can get one, and yet enough people are getting them that make it profitable, which, the whole chat before launch was that they couldn't possibly sell this at a profit. So it's incredible. It's been a great first 6 or 7 months of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, to be fair, but these numbers are just so impressive for Sony, and it's only going to get better when they can produce more. Yeah,
we should say as well, like, not to be too Sony pony about this, but Xbox have also had the best launch in their console's history as well, so they are killing it at the same time. They're just not killing it quite as hard as Sony are. Anyway, let's news item number 3. Borderlands 3 is getting partial cross-play support with one exception, and I'll give you 3 guesses who that exception is. Oh, that's right, it's PlayStation, who by this point have a storied history of resisting cross-play at every fucking available opportunity. Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford has made this statement on Twitter regarding the crossplay.
Good news or bad news first? Good news, an update for Borderlands 3 has been prepared for release that includes full crossplay support across all platforms. Bad news, for certification, we've been required by the publisher to remove crossplay support for PlayStation consoles.
So, to be clear about what's happening here, crossplay, including PlayStation crossplay, sounded like it was just ready to go for Borderlands 3. Then the Borderlands publisher, which is 2K, have told Gearbox, who are the developers, to remove support for PlayStation for certification. Therefore, everyone can play together apart from the people on PlayStation. Now, that is technically all we know, and we don't really know the real reason why either 2K are withholding crossplay functionality with Sony, or Sony have denied crossplay functionality to 2K. However, as we now know from the fallout of the Epic versus Apple trial, PlayStation have demanded compensation for allowing crossplay. Specifically, if their percentage of revenue from in-game purchases don't match the percentage of players that game on their platform, PlayStation want compensation. And Epic CEO Tim Sweeney has actually confirmed that under certain circumstances, PlayStation is owed compensation around Fortnite. So knowing that, and knowing PlayStation's history with crossplay, it's very hard not to equate the two in this situation, isn't it, Lewis? And I think 2K, quite reasonably, if this is the case, don't want to pay Sony compensation for something that is basically outside of their control. And I think that that's fair enough. But more to the point, as a PlayStation fan, as someone who wants to see PlayStation doing well, this is just terrible optics every single time. It just looks bad all the time. Every single time that this issue comes up, they look shit, and it annoys me because it cannot possibly be worth the PR hit every single time this comes up.
Yeah, it is not a good look whatsoever. Here we are again, seeing Sony put up the walled garden. They don't want to play nice with anyone else. It's a slightly complex issue, I think, because the money part of it is an interesting question, and I can see why Sony want compensation. I mean, you can obviously see why Sony want compensation because they want money, right?
But it's not fair, though. I mean, if proportionally more people on Xbox or Switch or PC happen to be spending more money on transactions than the people that play on PlayStation, then why do they deserve any compensation for that? They don't. They absolutely don't. To me, this is capitalistic money-grabbing bullshit, frankly, is what this is. And they should just be allowing gamers to game together, particularly when everyone else is on board and everyone else thinks this is a good idea. And it's just you fucking hoarding your pennies, you know? Just fuck off and just open up the doors, you know what I mean?
Yeah. From a business side, though, I mean, that is literally what it is, that they are looking at it saying, of course everyone else is more up for it because no one else is losing out in the way that Sony is likely to be. And I guess their point, sort of generally, that was being discussed as part of the trial discussions was that, you know, someone could be buying stuff on PC but actually then using it in game and on PlayStation, and so you can kind of understand why they think that they're losing money. I'm not saying that I agree with that or think, I mean, there must just be a smarter way of doing all this where all of the microtransaction money goes into one pot and then gets divided up by player base or something, if it has to be done in some kind of equal way like that. But forget all the business side of it for a minute, because it basically doesn't matter, I think, to the discussion that we are having, which is that, yeah, it's bullshit for the players. It is something that people want to see. We all want to be able to play with whoever, and particularly in a game like Borderlands. I do wonder whether 2K is making a little bit of a point here by essentially, like you say, we don't know for certain that this is what's going on, but the fact that this information about PlayStation asking or demanding compensation is out there now. Like, if this news broke and we had no idea that PlayStation were demanding compensation for Fortnite, people would be looking at this and thinking 2K are just being arseholes. But in reality now, 2K have put all the focus on PlayStation and the PlayStation's decision-making around this and kind of absolved themselves in the process. And it's not often 2K get to do that. I hope that this is a little bit of a first knock against PlayStation doing this more, because every time we see a game come out and say we're cross-platform, cross-play on every platform except PlayStation, we're all going to know why that is, and we know it's just money, and we're the ones giving PlayStation all the bloody money, so why won't you let us play with our mates?
Let us play with our mates, you fucking bastards. It's not hard. Anyway, Lewis, news item number 4. There has been yet more Switch Pro reports and a potential leak as well. So, firstly, the leak comes from Amazon Mexico, which seems to have shown a page for a new Nintendo Switch Pro as like its headline. Now, this was almost certainly a placeholder, meaning that that name doesn't mean anything or anything like that. Like, don't read too much into that. But if there was any doubt still remaining that the Switch Pro was real, I think that is basically gone now. Like, if Amazon are putting up placeholders for a new console, they're not doing that without any information, you know?
Yeah.
This is also off the back of a Bloomberg report that claims the announcement of the Switch Pro is in fact imminent, even saying that we could see the announcement pre-E3. And as we record this now, E3 is 11 days away, so the announcement could literally be any time. It could come between the time that we are recording this and the time that the episode actually releases. It could literally happen at any moment, it seems.
Knowing our luck, it's probably happening right now as we are talking to
Absolutely, of course. The article did also say that manufacturing will begin in July for a September/October release, so it seems as though Nintendo are aiming for the holidays this year to launch this console, which is very awesome. Apparently, manufacturers are also confident they will be able to fulfill Nintendo's orders despite the ongoing chip shortage, but I'll fucking believe that when I see it, quite frankly. Bloomberg has also said that the new model will have a higher price than the current $299 model because of better components, increased labour costs and things of that nature. Probably launching a console during a pandemic has done nothing good for the price whatsoever. So, Liz, I suppose the question here is, if we're talking in the range of 350 quid, which I'm assuming that we will be, is that an attractive price for an upgrade on your Switch for someone like you? And by someone like you, I mean someone who's a bit on the fence about it, but would upgrade eventually.
Yeah, I mean, it still, to me, depends less on the price alone and kind of more on what that price is buying you. And I don't really mean that in terms of, all the features and has it got this type of screen or that type of screen necessarily. Essentially what I'm judging this on is it going to be required, or is it virtually going to be required in order to play the best upcoming Nintendo first party games? To make it even simpler and clearer, the relationship between this console and Breath of the Wild 2 will more or less determine whether I buy it straight away or not. As you say, eventually I'm sure I would upgrade because, you know, the Switch is getting on a bit anyway. It's struggling to deal with some games that are out that were built for it at the moment. And so I'm sure at some point I would look to upgrade. But really it comes down to what is the point of having it? Now, I'm saying all that because I basically expect that is going to be the case, right? That you're going to need to have this thing in order to play Breath of the Wild 2.
I don't think you'll need it, to be clear. I don't think that you will need it at all.
Not
you
need,
will definitely
needs too strong.
Be supported on the old console, like definitely 100%.
Yeah,
unquestionable.
I don't mean to say that. Yeah, that they won't be playable. Like you'll need to have this. Sorry, but what I mean is like if it's night and day, you know, if you're playing a version that does not feel like the game should feel or is lacking certain features because of that, that would definitely do it for me. And £350 is a decent price, I think, for what we're talking about here, particularly if this future-proofs the Switch for the next 4 or 5 years. Still great, but is that where you are? I guess you're up for buying it as soon as it's available, basically.
I mean, if I could, I would, yes. I mean, I'm slightly more on the fence about it than probably you think. I'm probably not quite as gung-ho on it, but yes, I probably will upgrade as soon as I can, to be completely honest. But Lewis, a more interesting question. Hypothetically, if we're talking broadly the same money, would you be more likely to buy, or would you be more likely to upgrade to a Switch Pro, or would you be more likely to buy whatever Valve handheld, assuming that it exists?
Oh man, that is a good question. I suppose I have to say that I would be more likely to,
See? Hard, isn't it?
You've stumped me there. Well, because I was going to say I would be more likely to get the Switch Pro, but if you're asking me as someone who already owns a Switch...
Exactly.
Yeah, again, I guess that comes down partly to what I'm saying about games like Breath of the Wild 2, and also, I guess, what the kind of power the Steam handheld could offer. But yeah, I mean... I guess the ideal scenario would be to end up with a Switch Pro that you can play Breath of the Wild 2 in the glorious, up-resed, best version that you could possibly get of it, and then get the Steam Pal, if that is what it's going to be called, to play... I'm saying that because I know you dislike it.
I really
to play the rest of the games that you would traditionally have considered playing on Switch, right? Basically, a lot of these indie games and games that have come to Steam first and then come to Switch kind of next. That's been the narrative over the last few years. So I guess for me personally, I'm probably slightly more likely just to upgrade because it keeps it all in one there. But man, that Steam Pal proposition I think is a really interesting one. I'm desperate to know more about that if it's going to be real.
If it's going to be real, crucially, yeah. I have to admit, mate, I'm the same. I think that I'm slightly more hesitant to immediately upgrade to a Switch Pro because of the Steam Pal, if that is what it's going to be called. And has given me a bit of pause. So, yeah. Gabe Newell, make an announcement. I want to know more, mate. I want to know more.
That's it, yeah.
All right, listen, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number 1, free games list. First podcast of the month, and that means free games. On PlayStation Plus, you are getting Star Wars Squadrons, Virtua Fighter 5, and Operation Tango on the PS5. Not quite as good as previous months, I have to admit, although a lot of people seem to be into Virtua Fighter 5, so there you go. If you're a fighting games fan, then get involved with that. On Xbox Games Pass this month, you're getting The Wild at Heart, which is already available today. You're getting For Honor on June the 3rd. You're getting Backbone on June the 8th. And you're getting Darkest Dungeon on June the 10th. Leaving Games Pass is Ace Combat 7, Night Call, West of Dead, Wizard of Legend, and Observation. We'll have a link in the show notes to the Games Pass blog because it is slightly more complicated about what things are leaving which platform. Is it just PC? Is it on cloud? Is it on Xbox as well? You know, it's a vastly more complicated proposition, Games Pass, isn't it? But I have heard that more games will be announced at E3 for Games Pass this month as well, if you're thinking it's a little dry on the Xbox side as well. Alright, Lewis, now moving on to a whole bunch of gameplay trailers that we got this week, and I just wanted to touch on them, basically. Firstly, shout out number 2, I guess. Horizon Forbidden West was shown off in a state of play, and I thought the gameplay and the game in general looked absolutely fucking fantastic. Just fantastically good. I was ecstatically excited watching the whole thing. I was very, very pleased, Liz. Very, very pleased. It is easily my most anticipated game of the year, assuming that it is still coming out this year, because we still don't have a release date, and that is very annoying.
Seems super weird to me that they went through with the State of Play broadcast and didn't have any kind of date to announce, not even a rough season or anything like that. Having not had that by the end just seemed really odd that they would have put this out so close to Ratchet and Clank, which makes me wonder if they are going to make some kind of big announcement around E3 of that game's release date, and it might be sooner than we think, although it does seem like it would be the likely fall game.
Definitely, yeah.
But yeah, I thought it looked great. I mean, Horizon still doesn't do a lot for me. I'm not excited by it massively, but
you're entirely wrong and should play the first one.
It looks visually great. The new big robot guys look terrible to fight, and
that big elephant, man, that was something else. That was crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive stuff. Yeah, and it just looks like more Horizon. I don't know what else to say. I don't think underwater sections look great. I mean, they visually look great, but I don't really know what they're adding. New Breath of the Wild style glider looks like a good laugh.
God save me, yes.
And sort of a strange nod towards Breath of the Wild's free climbing, which isn't totally free climbing, but they're definitely suggesting more stuff is traversable in that way. So yeah, looking forward to seeing more, hearing more about it, and getting that date. That's the key thing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And just wanted to bring this up just as a very minor thing, because I know that people have been talking about it. If you're one of these people who thinks that Aloy's character model looks more masculine because it has a rounder face, absolutely go and fuck yourself. That is a total nonsense. Quite frankly, I cannot give this conversation any oxygen because I don't think that it deserves it. It's absolutely bullshit. What I will say, though, is that the gaming media's response to that was absolutely insane. Like, it was all like outrage over Aloy's character model or whatever. So far as I could see, there was one wanker on the internet and everyone dogpiled him, being like, you're a fucking moron. Like, it wasn't gamers are outraged, it was one guy.
Yeah, and sort of amplified it in the process, which wasn't ideal.
The gaming media did. Like, they could easily have just totally ignored it. Instead, they had to go, well, this guy who you've never heard from and will never hear from again, it said this thing, aren't you annoyed? And it's like, well, yeah, I am, but I'm more annoyed at you, actually, for telling me about it in the first place. Anyway, let's shout out number 3. We also got to see some Dying Light 2 gameplay as well, which honestly I thought looked pretty good. I am way more interested in this game than I thought that I might be. We also got a release date for this of December the 7th. I like what they're doing with their narrative as well, where depending on the decisions that you make in the game could potentially make a huge difference to your gameplay experience, to the point that it seems that parts of the game will just not be available to you depending on what decisions you make within the game, which I'm quite into. Like, I think that if that's executed well, that could be really cool. But I'm interested to know your thoughts on this as well, because on paper at least, like, this is a way more a game for you than it is a game for me, to be honest.
Yeah, I was quite keen on playing the first one and just sort of never got around to it, and as the generation moved on, it just felt like an older and older game. I think the gameplay looks stunning. I really think that mix of zombie action and parkour movement is a really nice thing. I think it looks great, and the day-night cycle that changes how the world kind of operates around you in terms of enemies and all that stuff, I think it looks smart. And it basically feels to me like they've taken what was good about the first game and just kind of attached a much bigger, broader thing to it. You know, these factions, these different groups that you can play off one another, that you can do favours for, the impact that they then have on the world. It's just a much richer and a more systems-based game than I think that the first one was. So if it comes out this year, if it makes the date that they've put forward for it, then I'm really keen to see if it can land that. It's been in development hell, and as you've said plenty of times, that can be fatal, essentially. So hopefully it does live up to how good it has looked in the few spots we've seen of it so far. Yeah,
definitely. All right, let's shout out number 4. We also got to see some Far Cry 6 gameplay this week as well, which, again, I thought looked pretty good. And after that trailer, again, I'm much more interested in the game than I thought I might otherwise have been. It also has a release date of October the 7th. However, due to the nature of the game, the old politics and video game question has come up again, because specifically Far Cry 5 sort of threatened to have a political viewpoint within its narrative, but put beautifully by Forbes, it was apolitical to the point of absurdity in the end. And for those of you that don't know, Far Cry 5 was set in America, sort of middle America for what I remember, and the bad guys were all religious fundamentalists, and this was also during Trump era, and it could have been basically a really interesting game, and I think a lot of people thought, oh, this could be really interesting depending on what they do with this setting that they've laid out in front of us, and they done absolutely nothing with it at all. I think that me and you will agree here that politics can absolutely be used in video games, and this whole no politics in video games movement is absolutely absurd, frankly. But I think that we would equally agree that if you are using politics in a video game, then you have to carry the weight of that political decision around with you. You can't just shy away from that fact. You can't just co-opt politics to sell your game. That's absolutely bullshit, and you're just otherwise creating a cheap controversy, basically. And again, it's just to move copies of your game, which is utterly bullshit. Now, I know that the narrative director has issued a statement on the, quotes, politics issue, but I'm still a little bit suspect of this, to be completely honest with you, because he has said, so the guy's name's Navid Kavari, but he has said that the game deals with the rise of fascism in a nation, the cost of imperialism, forced labour, the need for free and fair elections, and LGBTQ rights. There is absolutely no both sidesing those political points. Do you know what I mean? Yep. They can't do that. And if you're going to involve those political elements in your game, you have to stand by your convictions if you're going to be using these themes, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure that they're going to do that, basically. Ubisoft have history here. They threaten to do stuff like this all the time and then ultimately don't.
Yeah, I think that's the key point to take away from this. Like, I think this is a decent statement from the creators behind the game to put out, but yeah, we just need to wait and see when the game lands, because they've flirted with this stuff before, they've let us down, they've made promises. I think fundamentally the problem with Far Cry and with Ubisoft more generally, but specifically Far Cry, is that all of those political issues that you mention are really interesting things to explore and to deal with, but if your only mechanism to deal with them is to shoot everything and kill everyone, that's not really engaging with those issues either. So it feels to me like Far Cry gets undercut by what it actually is all the time, and I don't really know if there's a way around that.
It's a difficult line to walk, and Ubisoft have failed to walk it at all.
Exactly. In a sort of cartoonishly violent way, it's a difficult line to walk, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. But Lewis, finishing off with shoutout number 5, and just as we were recording this, it was announced that a Crysis remaster trilogy will be launching in fall this year. Although the remaster of Crysis 1 wasn't massively well received, to be completely honest, Crytek are continuing with remasters of the second and third games. The games will be sold separately and as a trilogy collection. They will be coming to both last and current gen consoles, including the Switch, as well as PC. I know that these games have like a pretty serious fan base, particularly on the PC side, I believe. So I really hope that the second and third games live up to expectations that the first one clearly failed to meet, you know?
Yeah, hopefully for any fans out there, this does what it needs to do. I can't say I'm particularly interested in any of the Crysis games, but they've got a kind of interesting role in gaming history. So
they do, and I'm hoping that the remakes are good for the fans. You know what I mean? It's not anything that's particularly interesting me, but I don't want to see anybody fail. So let's fucking hope that they do well. All right, listen. On that note, time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is our play-along of Katana Zero, Lewis. Katana Zero is the first game by Askiisoft, which is actually just solo developer Justin Stander. The game was originally made on Game Maker Studio and took 6 years to complete, and was finally released in April 2019. Now, Lewis, you had played this game last year or a couple of years ago now?
Yeah, I think it was near the start of lockdown last year, actually, about just over a year ago now, yeah.
And I just played it at the beginning of this month. I have to say, Lewis, the first thing that I knew about this game was its soundtrack. The music is absolutely excellent. I absolutely love it. It's very 80s synthwave. I think this is the first game I have ever heard its soundtrack before I played the game. And I actually sought out the soundtrack to listen to before I played the game. It is just fantastic. And I just wanted to get the music in right at the top here when we're discussing this, because I fucking loved it.
Yeah, the music is absolutely fantastic. If you've not played the game, if you've no intention of playing the game, definitely worth checking that out. If you're into that kind of 80s synth pop kind of vibe. Yeah, it's just great. And it's so propulsive within the game as well. It gives you that energy to just keep going and keep slashing up people.
Yeah, it's nicely brought into the game itself as well, where it's like he's supposed to be listening to this music as he is doing the actions that you, the gamer, are actually doing, and it just works. It just works fantastically well. I really, really like it. And just at the top here as well, we have to talk about the art style, which is also absolutely superb. I absolutely fucking love it. See the sort of modern 16-bit style, generally, I love it. But specifically this one, I just thought looked fantastic as well. Like, I really thought it looked fantastic. And that style as well brings the game together. I feel it's that sort of neon 80s style of dystopian metropolis, you know, and it just sort of imbues a very good vibe. I just think it is perfect, you know what I mean? It's just great. Like, the art style along with the music is just visually and sonically stunning. I think it's really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely on that point, Mark. The feel of it, the look of it, and the sort of the mood of the world that it's in, it feels so connected to like 80s action cinema, but set in a kind of post-war future. You know, that is literally what it is, a kind of post-war future. But
yeah, but it's like the 80s vision of what the future is.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's bound to be an actual film that you could just point to and be like, this is so close to it. It's so recognisable, but it doesn't feel hackneyed because of that. Like you say, the 16-bit style and the kind of synthy soundtrack, it could all feel a bit stale and overdone, and it just works so nicely. It hangs together so well.
Absolutely, Lewis. But on to the key components of this game, which are the gameplay and the story. I'm going to say some overarching things here, then we can maybe dive into the gameplay and the story. But basically, I thought that I was going to like the gameplay more than I did. And I thought I was going to like the story less than I ended up liking it. Because as it turns out, I really, really liked the story. And I was a bit so-so on the gameplay.
Oh, really?
And I thought that would be entirely the other way around. What were your thoughts?
Definitely similar with the story aspect to it. I didn't go into it thinking there was going to be much story at all. I thought it was going to be, you know, a run and slash, just a pure action game, and never really considered that it would have quite a deep and rich story that I guess we'll kind of come back to in a wee second. But in terms of the gameplay, I mean, it's simple, I suppose you could say. Not that every level is simple to get through, but there's not much to it. You know, after a couple of levels, you basically know what you're doing and what your tools are, essentially, to get through each bit. But I found it really, I mean, it was challenging at times. As I was saying about the music, that kind of propulsive action feel to it all felt very sort of Celeste-like, in terms of that I've got to just have one more go. You know, I've died, but I know what I'm supposed to do. I died on the very last guy. I've got to do it again. I can't give up now. The whole game is imbued with a sense of time running out and time being all weird, and that is part of the story, which again we can touch on in a second. But because of that, each level, it just feels like fuck, I've got to run, I've got to slash, I've got to kill, and I really enjoyed that. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I thought it was great fun to play.
I suppose that we should say that the main mechanic of this game that sort of separates it is that you're just a wee samurai dude who goes through 2D levels and has to kill all the enemies in that level. You can't get hit at all or you'll die, so you have to go through perfectly on each stage. But if you do die, it's instant respawn back at the start. But otherwise, you do have mechanics for like bullet time and slowing down time and whatever, and things like that. I will say that my problem with the gameplay, I suppose, was that I thought it was going to be like continuously moving, continuously dodging, deflecting this bullet, killing this guy, very precise actions, and sort of clearing a stage all at once, where in actual fact it wasn't really like that. It was more like you go forward, you clear these two guys, then you clear the next two guys, then you clear these three guys, then you clear the final guy, and then you're on to the next stage. It was a lot more stagnated, I suppose, than I thought that it might have been. And you make a comparison to Celeste, to use that again, I thought it was going to be more like a Celeste screen where you jump off a platform, you bounce off this thing, jump up here, you need to make this precise jump over to here, and then if you do all of it correct, then you land at the other side of the screen and then you move on to the next one. And I thought it was going to be more like that, and it wasn't. I thought it was going to involve more precise action, and it didn't. I actually thought that I got through some stages basically by being lucky, or basically by sort of flapping around until I killed everyone. That's not the sort of game that I thought it would be. I'm not trying to judge the game for what it isn't, I'm trying to judge the game for what it is, but even in what it is, it was more stagnant and less fluid than I thought it was going to be, and I sort of wish that it was. This game could go from being like a really solid 8, which is a great score, particularly for an indie game, but like this game is on the cusp of being something really, really special, you know? Everyone should go and play this game, even if it's just for the fucking soundtrack. Holy shit. But it's definitely worth playing. It's just that the gameplay wasn't quite there. And to be honest with you, before I wrote the little intro to this section of the podcast, I didn't even know it was done by one guy, which shows how impressive the game is. But also the fact that it's done by one guy, I'm suddenly thinking, oh, that explains a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair comment. That, as I said before, like, the gameplay isn't perfect, and when you do realise that it's such a small project, it's such a small thing, you know, I think that's to be commended, that it looks as good, sounds as good, and feels as good as it can do. But yeah, you're definitely right. There are sections where, you know, you are just kind of surrounded by guys and you're just smashing square or X on the Switch controls to just kill whatever happens to be nearest, and you know, you can use the bullet time to your advantage in that way as well, where if you're not quite sure what's about to happen, you can just kind of slow things down. And then that is the benefit as well, though, obviously, of the kind of instant restarts, is that it's a game that allows you to fail a couple of times quickly, and then you can try and do your perfect run. So it is within your power to make it as fluid as you were sort of hoping it would be, or almost as fluid as that. But I totally get exactly what you're outlining there, where it's almost like 4 kind of smaller puzzles within a room that you're trying to solve, and then you get through, you know.
Exactly right, yeah. What I will say on the story front, though, is that this is 1,000 times more interesting than I thought it was going to be. Like, really, really is. And things like the bullet time and the respawning, the quick respawning, and even like your ability to move the way that you do is all narratively justified in a really interesting way, and a really interesting story. And a much wider story than I ever thought it could be. Like, I always thought it was just going to be like, this samurai guy is going out to get revenge for X reason. Yeah. Like, I didn't really care what the story was. I thought it was all going to rely on the gameplay. But in actual fact, they've sort of flipped it on me a little bit. Like, they really have. And it's actually a really interesting, abstract story that hits on a lot of things that sci-fi nerd boy Mark finds very interesting. Like time travel and potentially like alternate realities and stuff like that. And very abstract notion of what time is. Just an abstract story in general, I suppose, that I think was made to be a bit open-ended. Also, this is the only indie game I think I've ever played that ended on like a proper cliffhanger that said that there will be another game coming here, so stay tuned, sort of thing. I was like, holy shit, this is amazing, because when the game ended I was like, oh, it just sort of ended all of a sudden. But then after the credits, it was like, to be continued, and I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. I don't know why that got me so much, but I was just like, this is absolutely great. To be clear, like, all that stuff that I was saying that was a wee bit negative about the gameplay stuff, like, none of that at all would stop me from playing the sequel, even if the sequel's gameplay was precisely the same as this game. If they just brought out a new game with a new story, then I would play it 100% without any hesitation whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the game could just stand some new levels to be added to it, and that would be worth playing. There is DLC planned. It should be releasing this year, apparently. I guess we'll see if COVID has had an impact on one man's development
on a one-man
process.
studio. I reckon it probably has, Liz, personally.
But absolutely. I mean, you could just continue that story and not really vary much about the gameplay. Maybe tighten it up a little bit, as you say, and add some new mechanics. But there's so much there in that story. We won't go into all the nitty-gritty of it.
I don't want to spoil it necessarily either. But it's so big. It's such a big story that they're trying to tell, and they do quite well, to be honest.
Absolutely. Like, for a game that is only actually, 4 or 5 hours long in total, to include as much as it does in terms of filling in the story of the world that they're in. So, as I say, it's sort of like a post-Vietnam War situation where America is lost and things are bad kind of thing. That's sort of, I mean, it's all fictionalized, but that's kind of roughly what's going on. And then there's just so much more on top of that, and your ability to trust the people around you, and the introduction quite early on of a sort of dialogue mechanic, which playing it the first time, I was never quite sure whether my decisions actually mattered too much, and in small ways they do, but I think you're quite often funneled towards the same story beats, and so you're never missing out on what is actually, I think, quite an intelligently put together sci-fi story, albeit that's what it is, but yeah, a really nicely put together story.
It's interesting what you said there. I think that something that is done quite badly in sci-fi and in fantasy is world building, where world building is done basically through a shit ton of exposition, which is a bad way to write. Whereas in this game, it is quite intelligently done, and it's show don't tell, isn't it? It shows you the world that you're in, and you feel that world. This incredibly small game by one guy has done an expert job, really, of building this world. of creating this world even these characters inhabit, and it's done so well. Like, the story in the game is done so well, and even when it ends, and it does end relatively abruptly, the fact that it tells you there is more of this, wait for it. I almost think it's a stroke of genius, man. I really do. Like, this game was 6 years in development. I mean, dude's got to get out of the door at a certain point, you know what I mean? And if I've got to wait for Katana Zero 2 or whatever the fuck they're going to call it, I am 100% on board. Like, this is a very talented person who's made this game. And with more support and more money, I would be very, very intrigued to see what this person does with more resources, you know?
Absolutely, I think that's spot on. Yeah, and just for anyone who hasn't been playing along with us or hasn't given it a bash yet, do check it out. It's a really nice, it's a short game, it's a perfect Switch game. It's one of those classic great games for the Switch, so definitely take a look at it. And yeah, I think you're right to say that, Mark. Keep an eye on Askiisoft games and Justin Stander going forward, because it's a real accomplished thing to have put out for a first game.
Absolutely. For one guy, this is a very, very accomplished game indeed. But Lewis, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, it just helps us out so much. I know I say it twice a week, every single week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. So if you could take those 5 seconds to go and give us 5 stars, it really does mean a huge amount. Genuinely, it does. All right, Lewis, and it is time to announce our play-along game for this month, and it is Gris.
It is indeed, yeah. Gris is this very beautiful sort of adventure platform game from a Spanish studio called Nomada Studio. It came out, I think, just a year or two ago and was met with quite a lot of praise at the time, particularly for its visuals. That's the thing that it absolutely stands out for. You have very likely seen the artwork for this game because it was plastered everywhere on release. But yeah, another small game from a small studio, but one that has been on my playlist for ages. I think we both own the game and have owned it for a while, but just haven't got around to playing it yet.
Probably owned this game for over a year. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, pick it up, play along with us, let us know what you think. It would be really good to know what you all think of it.
Absolutely. And we are spelling this Gris as well. Gris.
That's correct.
Which is Spanish for grey. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.